Bonjour, je suis honoré d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Cette photo représente mon défunt Pierre. Il est dans la Royal Air Force pendant la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Il était à Abbeville pendant la première année de la guerre. Il est rentré en France 4 ans plus tard. C'est faire le nombre ami de Français. Après la guerre, il a suivi une formation de professeur de français et pu faire venir ses élèves en France. Il sera fier de me savoir parmi vous aujourd'hui. Malheureusement, mon français est médiocre. J'étais un mauvais élève. La suite de mon discours sera en anglais. So just to, this is me. This is my passion. I'm a pilot. I love flying, aerobatics especially. But this is also me. I'm an airline pilot for a big UK airline. And I'm lucky to be a training standards captain, which means that I train our pilots, our new pilots. I train our current pilots. I get to examine them. I get to have the honor of watching some really good people do what they do and watch how they do it really well. And I've learned a lot about how humans work together and what it takes to make a success of what we do. I am probably better known to many of...
Can you hold your microphone closer?
Okay. Better? Très bien. This is probably what I'm better known for, which is my family. This is my late wife, Elaine, with our 2 young children, Victoria and Adam. Elaine went into hospital for a routine operation 20 years ago, and problems occurred during anesthesia. She never woke up, and she died 13 days later. I didn't understand what had happened, and I wanted to try and make sense of it. But I also had Victoria and Adam, our 2 young children, to try and bring up. After Elaine died, I thought there would be an investigation. But I had to campaign for that to happen. And eventually, what we discovered when we did have an investigation was that the issues that led to Elaine's death were all about human factors, about non-technical skills, but also about design. The design of the process, the design of the systems, design of the training that the team had undergone, and some design of the tools as well. It took me a little time to start to understand more of what had happened, and I spoke to doctors and to nurses and to very clever people like Professor Jim Reason and René Amalberti to try and understand a bit more about healthcare. And after a couple of years, it was obvious that there were some very clever people doing some really good things, but that healthcare didn't really understand human factors. So in 2007, we formed the Clinical Human Factors Group. Like the Facteurs Humains Santé, it was a group of people just trying to do the right thing, trying to make things better. But we had doctors and nurses and midwives and academics and policymakers, and just trying to work out what needed to happen. But I also needed to try and understand more about how we became safe in aviation. And aviation is not perfect. We are still learning every day. But I wanted to try and understand, how did we make things as safe as they were? And the first people I spoke to were accident investigators. In the UK, we have the Air Accident Investigation Branch. I have worked with most of those people now, and I've done some human factors work with them. But also in France, the BEA and organisations like that. How do they think? And when they go to an accident, they don't ask why. Why did it happen? What they start with is, why did it make sense at the time? Because when something goes wrong, people did what they did because it was the right thing in their minds at the time to do. And when you ask this question, you can start to learn more about what happened. Someone else I spoke to very soon after Elaine died was the man on the right, Professor Sid Watkins. He was Formula One's chief medical officer. On the left-hand side is Ayrton Senna, the famous racing driver who died about 25 years ago in a Formula One accident. And Sid and I met over a dinner in London, and I told him what had happened to Elaine, and he shared with me the story of what had happened to Ayrton Senna and how it affected him. In the 25 years before Senna died, one racing driver died a year in racing accidents. In the 25 years after Senna's death, only one racing driver has died in a racing accident. That's an amazing improvement in safety. But what Sid didn't do after he lost his good friend was he didn't say to the racing drivers, slow down, take it easy, don't make a mistake. What he did instead was he tried to change the design of the racing tracks. He tried to change the governing body's rules for Formula One. He tried to persuade the manufacturers to change the design of the cars, and he standardized the medical facilities at the various tracks. So that remarkable improvement in safety did not come about by changing behavior. It came about by changing design. And I started to try and understand more about aviation, about how did we get better at what we did. Some of you will have read Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto. And Gawande talks about this aircraft as being the aircraft that launched checklists in aviation. But this aircraft did much more than that, because when this aircraft came into service, it was one of the most complicated aircraft that had ever operated. And it had two features that made it complicated for the pilots. It had the wheels, the undercarriage would move up and down, and it had flaps on the wings that would move up and down. And when this aircraft came into service, they found that the pilots were making stupid mistakes. They were getting confused over the switches that moved the flaps and the wheels. And maybe the pilots were stupid. But what they did is they asked a very clever engineer to look at the problem. And what he did is he looked at this aircraft and he noticed that the design of the levers that moved the flaps and the gear looked the same and were next to each other in the cockpit. And then he looked at another aircraft, a transport aircraft that was very similar to this, but had moving gear and flaps, and the levers that did that were different and they were in different places in the cockpit. So he thought that the problem here wasn't the pilots, it was the design. This is the aircraft that I fly, the Airbus A320. And even today, although all of this is electric, the lever that moves the gear, I have to reach forward. It's shaped like a wheel. It's black like a tyre. It feels rough. And in fact, on Boeing aircraft, it's actually made of rubber, like a wheel. And if I want to move the flaps, I have to reach behind me to a smooth lever that is like a wing or a flap. It would be cheaper to make all the switches the same. They're all electric. But we have regulations now in aviation that say these must be designed this way, and it doesn't matter whether it's Airbus, Boeing, or any other aircraft. It doesn't stop error, but it stops a lot of error. And it's about making it easy to get it right and hard to get it wrong. And that is the principle of design for safety. How do we do it in healthcare? This is an anaesthetic machine. About 15 years ago, our National Health Service, the NHS, started to use this machine. In one hospital, in the first month, 3 patients almost died. And the reason is this switch here. In this position, it sends the air, the oxygen to the patient, and in the other position, it sends it to the atmosphere. It took 3 patients almost dying because it was in the wrong position, and eventually another patient who did die for them to realize there was maybe a problem. Now, in aviation, this switch would have a guard on it. It would have a warning sound. It would have a warning light. But none of that exists in healthcare. 10 years later, patients were still being harmed, and another patient died at the same hospital because this switch was in the wrong position. And finally, with the work of my group, the Clinical Human Factors Group, we managed to persuade the regulator that maybe this was a bad idea. In fact, in aviation, we wouldn't even have this switch. It wouldn't exist. And as Francois has already said, you have to deal with this. Drugs that look alike in packaging that is hard to read. The irony is that we know this is a problem, yet we buy these drugs and then we give them to you. And we say to you, be careful, don't make a mistake, don't get it wrong, cross-check. So we give you the error-prone situation. And even worse, in the UK, we have a National Health Service that could buy drugs that have packaging designed better, but we don't buy them nationally. Each individual hospital buys their own drugs. Some of you will have seen this video, Gina's story. Gina, a lady, went into hospital for a procedure to have some imaging done. Where the procedure was done, a contrasting agent was drawn up and put into a galley pot. Other agents were put into other galley pots. The lights were turned low so the images could be seen. And they injected the wrong agent into her, and she had a leg amputated as a result. Again, this is design of the process. It's design of the equipment, which makes it easy to get it wrong and hard to get it right. The good news is that this can sometimes be easier to fix than you think. You don't need to see the detail here, but on the left-hand side is a form used at a hospital for when patients are admitted. It's to assess the patient for acute kidney injury or the danger and risk of it. But the hospital, using the form on the left, noticed that even though patients were being assessed at risk of acute kidney injury, they weren't receiving the right care. And so what they did is they redesigned the form, and it helps lead you to the correct actions. And they tried it in simulation. They then did a trial with patients. And what they found was that simply by redesigning the form, same information, but in a different format, made it much easier to get the patient on the right care pathway. And subsequently, more patients received the correct care just because of the design of a form. Sometimes it can be simple, but you still need to test it. For pre-hospital medicine, this is something developed in Scotland. It's called a scram bag. It's designed to be used on a dark, stormy, rainy night on a mountain when you're trying to retrieve somebody, rescue somebody. It's designed so that all the equipment you need is easy to get, and it has pre-filled syringes. Again, trying to make it easy to get it right and hard to get it wrong. In Toronto, in Canada, they noticed that in the admissions unit, in accident and emergency, that things were always very chaotic. And so they observed, a group of experts and doctors sat and observed how people moved around over a number of weeks. And then they made a model of how they might reorganize the unit. And having made the model, they then did a simulation using real equipment and real people of how it might work. Then they designed and bought in some equipment which was going to make it easier to get it right. This is for difficult airways. They marked up floors, so it showed areas that made it less likely that people would stand, and other areas where people should stand. And the end result was a unit that was built around the humans who worked there, again making it easy to get it right and hard to get it wrong. And in fact, when COVID arrived, they asked the same team to design the processes to help patients arrive at the hospital to be tested and all to be done safely. Again, they did a mock-up, they did a simulation before the real patients arrived. This is all about designing to make it easy to get it right. How do we do it in the National Health Service? This is a brand new accident and emergency unit with an admissions unit. It cost millions of pounds to build. but we didn't allow any clinicians or experts near it. It was built by architects, and they were clever architects. The day before it was opened, they let the clinicians and some human factors experts come in to look at it. And what they discovered was that you couldn't get the emergency trolleys through the doors. It's almost as bad as that. And this is apparently a helicopter emergency medicine site in the UK. What could go wrong? I'll come back to design in a moment. My life has moved on. I have remarried. I've inherited 2 older children. And Victoria and Adam are doing well. Adam is on the left. This is a number of years ago. He's grown up. He's now working in cybersecurity. And there is about 50% of his job is about human factors. Yes, he loves the tech, but actually it's about how humans think and behave and how systems are designed. Victoria is on the right. She is a private pilot now. She took me flying a few days ago. She also works as cabin crew for the airline that I work for, and she hopes to be a professional pilot one day. But they've done well. The lady second from the left, Megan, she is a cardiac nurse. And I had the pleasure of being treated on her ward when I had my own heart attack a number of years ago. So life for me is good. But doing what we do, trying to bring about change, is very difficult. It is easier to train people than it is to design the system. And it's a real challenge. So what lessons can I leave you from what we've done in the UK, what the Clinical Human Factors Group have done? It's coming back. That's okay. It's up. The first lesson is always have someone who knows what he's doing. I think the big lesson for me is that as a group of volunteers, as a group of people passionate trying to make a difference, we brought together a lot of diverse experience. And Factors Humains Santé is very lucky because you do have a wider range of experience than we started with. So that is really good. The second thing was to try and network with people across the industry, to network with politicians, to network with policymakers, to network with academics. And that networking is like being an entrepreneur. I was just a pilot. I like rules. I like to know what I'm doing. And suddenly I had to learn to be an entrepreneur, which I wasn't. But that spirit of being able to go out and network and build a network is really important. But at the same time, you also need a structure to help you move forward. And so, as a charity, our success, I think, has come from those two things. That we have people who are really good at structure and organization, but we also have people who are really good at networking and coming up with bright ideas. And having those two sorts of people and bringing them together is where good things happen. And the challenge for people like Francois has been trying to manage that and bring that together, and that will remain the challenge. But there are so many young people here today, and that is really good. The bad news is for the young people here is you are going into a healthcare system that is not perfect. It is not designed around you, and sadly, you will make mistakes, and some of you may end up killing a patient. But that is not because you're bad people. That is because the system works against you. But the good news is you are learning this now. And the people who went before you didn't know this. And the people who went before you were trained to think they were perfect, but they were not. Thank you very much.
Cette slide est représentative. Non, bon, c'est pas, bon, bah là c'est vrai, c'est plus compliqué. Non, je voulais montrer la dernière, s'il te plaît. Voilà, c'est pas si simple de réussir.
That's okay. I'm happy to take questions if that's appropriate, or
I might have one, if this is okay. Did you find a way to modify the things politically in England, or?
yes. So what we had to do was to find out who, if you're trying to launch a business, you would, and you wanted funding for that business, you would think about who can I go to and how do I get to that person? And we had to do the same, not for funding, but to try and get political influence. So we had to think, how do we get to the health minister? Who works with the health minister? Who are the clinicians who work with the health minister who can explain what we are trying to do? And I think it was also about having a compelling story to go with. We used my late wife's story, but it could have been any other story of harm or anything that would have got attention. But because it was being delivered not by me, but by a clinician who was close to the minister, we were able to build a relationship. And then we built relationships with the civil servants, the administrators who worked around the minister. And eventually it meant that we got to work with one particular minister, and we were able to use that to bring about change. And so we have our healthcare safety investigation branch in the UK now, HSSIB. That came about as part of that relationship. But it takes a long time. But at the same time, long-term change comes from the clinicians themselves wanting this. And so you also have to work with all the specialities, whether dentists or surgeons or midwives or whoever, to try and get them on board, because it's about making it easy for them to get it right. And that's something we all want.
Thank you.
Quand on a fait ce programme, on s'est dit, on a eu plusieurs personnes qui nous ont dit, mais les gens vont venir et ils vont repartir avec quoi? Parce qu'on va parler de choses, mais sur lesquelles ils n'ont pas de prise. Vous venez d'avoir une réponse qui montre le contraire. En fait, on a la possibilité de changer les choses, mais ça prend du temps.
Yes.
Thomas.
I'm Thomas Lopez, a member of the Facteur Humain en Santé. I'm an anesthesiologist. First of all, thank you to be there because your story has transformed the death of your wife into something positive. My question is, we have two manufacturers for ventilators in anesthesia. GE mainly, GE Drager. Do you know if they have a human factor department? Because it completes the question of Eve. There is the political aspect, and we know that it weighs in the balance. But there is the manufacturing aspect and
yes.
the production pressure. And we see that even in aviation, the obligation of human factor certification for Airbus, and Claude Vallot is here to talk about it, has came with the A380 because of the incidents that we had putting in the A320. I will just translate my question for the others. Je demandais à Martine Bromiley. Nous avons deux grands producteurs de respirateurs en France d'anesthésie qui sont GE et Drager. Donc ma première question, c'était de savoir s'ils avaient un département de facteurs humains. Voilà, ça c'est un. Et deux, il faut savoir que dans l'aviation, l'obligation de certification de facteurs humains est venue avec l'A380, avec les difficultés qu'ils ont eues dans les mises en service. Ceux qui sont un peu âgés comme moi savent qu'il y a eu quelques A320 qui se sont crashés pour des problèmes de design, notamment à Absheim, si vous allez voir le rapport d'incident. Thank you.
So I know that some, I don't know about Drager. I would expect they should do, and I don't know about GD. Certainly there are some organizations out there who design medical equipment, which does have some human factors expertise in, but it's still limited. I think the problem is that there isn't the regulation to require it, and a lot of human factors experts look at healthcare and think, actually, I can go and earn more money going to work in aviation or in defense or in other areas, cybersecurity. And it's not about the money being paid, it's about how they're received. That's the problem, I think, is that it's still, manufacturers in healthcare tend to regard human factors about making look something that's nice and interesting. Everybody loves a bit of shiny new tech. When you talk to pilots, interestingly, most pilots are quite scared of new tech. We don't like it. We worry about it because we don't know what it brings us. Whereas I think you find a lot of doctors and, I'm sorry to say, a lot of surgeons particularly love new tech. So they're really embracing artificial intelligence. They're really embracing various new tools and ideas, but without understanding the risks. And that's really sounds great, but as a patient, that's not great. So I think there is a double problem here that we need to encourage the manufacturers through regulation. We can also sell it to them via this actually will make your product better for safety, but we also need to make that attractive to expertise to come in from other industries as well. We're seeing more of it now in the UK. More and more human factors experts are coming into the area of design, but mostly in medical roles, not in design roles at the moment. So, thank you, Thomas.
Yes, Martin, Franck Renoir.
Frank.
I have maybe a provocative question. If it's always the fault of the system, why I have to continue to try to improve my performance?
Good question. Because it's like trying to, as professionals, we want to be better. So even with a perfect system, we know that there is no such thing as a perfect system. It is impossible. You design something and you create other problems, maybe not as many, but you still create problems. So we need the human in the system to try and optimize and still act as that final line of defense. And when things go really wrong and things get really complicated, the human is very good at adapting to that, but even better, the human is even better at adapting it to prevent it happening in the first place, because the human can see it happen. And so the human has a very real role, whether we're talking about aviation, whether we're talking about healthcare, and being absolutely the best you can be is fundamental. So in aviation at the moment, and I was talking to some colleagues last night, in aviation at the moment, for my own airline, we spend a lot of time trying to get the system right. We spend a lot of time training the behaviours around human factors and CRM, and we're now doing a lot of work around human performance, about how we can optimise the human in how they think and how they operate, taking account of everything that's going on at the moment in society. So it's quite hard at the moment with everything going on in society. We have lots of things on the news that distract us. We have these things that distract us. How can we continue to focus? And we continue to work on that because we think the humans are still a core part of the system. We just get help from the machines. Thank you, Franck.
Hi, hello. Sylvain Garnier from Nîmes. Thank you for your presence. I'm sorry, my father wasn't an English teacher, so I just have a question. Today, each hospital in France doesn't have access to designer services. What do you think about using neural events and suppressing reports to detect such problem as your switch light?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think using instant reports, I mean, data is great, but sometimes in healthcare we talk about data and we talk about evidence as being numbers. But you have to use qualitative data as well, which is incident reports, which is human experience. That is just as valuable and just as valid when it comes to evidence for whatever it is you might be doing. And within that, the power of stories is also very important. Real lived experience, and you know, Francois mentioned Steve Shorrock and his work around work as imagined and work as done. Trying to understand how we think the system is and how it actually is very important evidence for how we can change. So I think that answers the question. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Martin.
Thank you.